Well, welcome everyone. Let's get started. We have a brand new feature here at ICNM 2020, and that's sessions on culinary medicine. We're going to be doing them every single day, and I think you're going to love them. We're going to talk about how to translate nutritional science into practicalities for you and for your patients. Let me encourage you also, if you have questions, you will see a place to enter your question in the lower right-hand side of your screen. Type your questions in there. We'll take as many as we can at the end of today's presentation. So today, joining me is Dr. Carolyn Trapp, the Director of Diabetes Education and Care at the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, Maggie Neola, Registered Dietitian and Community Nutrition Program Manager at the Physicians Committee, Dr. Vanita Rahman, and Dr. Jasmal Sardana of the Barnard Medical Center. So let's get started. Dr. Sardana, let's start with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Barnard. Good afternoon, everyone. So undoubtedly, you will be learning from so many incredible, knowledgeable speakers this weekend about nutrition. But at the end of the conference, how will you take that wonderful nutrition information and translate that into real-life conversations with your patients in your clinic visits? So what I'll be doing is sharing with you a practical framework and also share briefly about a technique called motivational interviewing that you can use to help guide those conversations. So this is Mr. S. He is 67 years old, overweight, has multiple comorbidities, and he's your first appointment on the Monday after ICNM. Unfortunately, though, you've noticed over the last couple of years, all of his numbers have been getting worse. You really want to talk to him about nutrition, but you're not sure exactly where to start. So the 5 A's framework is an effective patient-centered behavior change counseling model. Studies actually show that the odds of a patient increasing their motivation to change their diet is higher with each additional step of this framework that is delivered by a physician. And as you go through this 5 A's framework, and it's important to note that you don't have to go through all of these steps in one visit. You know, we want to leverage the strength of our continuity of care and the patient-provider relationship, and you may need to stretch out this conversation over a couple of visits. But as you go through this framework, what will naturally and organically emerge are the patient's goals, their barriers to achieving those goals, strategies to overcome those barriers, and a clear follow-up plan. So the first step in the 5 A's framework is assess. And even before that, there's another A that's all important, which is ask. You want to ask our patients if we can talk to them about their diet and nutrition. So at this stage, we want to assess their diet. There are multiple ways to do this. You can do a 24-hour diet recall. You could do a food journal. But in a busy practice, what I found is this particular question that you can ask your patients. How would you like your diet to improve? And what this deceivingly simple question does, it leverages the fact that most of us, including our patients, have already considered how their diet can improve. And our patient might say, you know what, I do want to eat healthier, and I think it's time to start doing that. You also want to assess their motivation. And you simply need to ask, why? Why do you want your diet to improve? But here's the key. You want to ask why a couple of times. And with each subsequent ask of why, you get deeper and deeper into their motivation. Again, a powerful motivator for change. You also want to assess their stage of change. So evidence shows that health behavior change programs are most effective when it's guided by a framework, a theoretical construct. And so one such theoretical construct is the trans-theoretical model of behavior change. And essentially there are 5 steps here, or 5 buckets, as it were, that all of our patients fall into when it comes to behavior change. Patients who are in the pre-contemplation bucket or stage or step are usually unaware of the problem. They have no idea that their diet and the health problems that they have are linked. In fact, they're probably in denial. In contemplation phase, patients are aware of that link, but they're not sure how to make that change. In preparation phase, they understand the link and they're starting to make some changes in preparation for that change. So maybe they're cleaning out their fridge, maybe they're cleaning out their pantry and buying more healthy groceries. In action phase, they're actually eating a plant-based diet, but they just started. And in maintenance phase, now they're pros. They've been doing this and eating this way for at least 6 months. The next step is to advise. So this is our opportunity, your opportunity to be the best whole food plant-based advocate you can be, taking all of this wonderful information from ICNM and sharing it with your patients. But this is how we should do this. We want to make sure that these conversations are culturally relevant, patient-centered, and tailored to those specific conditions, those diseases, those comorbidities that our patients have. So for example, if your patient has diabetes or hypertension, share with them how a whole food plant-based diet specifically can improve their diabetes or their high blood pressure. Next, this is a powerful step of the 5A's framework, which is where we agree with the patient to come up with a dietary goal, and you just simply ask. Most patients, what I found is they're initially a little bit taken aback, but then they're so grateful and thankful for their provider asking this. And most often they'll share, yeah, actually, I want to try that plant-based diet that you told me about. And that's a great goal. I want to hear that from all of my patients. But the problem with this goal is that it's kind of vague. And what I'm going to challenge each of you to do is to take that vague goal and level it up to a SMART goal, a goal that's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So let's see how this vague goal translates into a SMART goal. So here are some good specific examples. A SMART goal is much more specific, and it makes the goals much more clearer for a patient. And by focusing and being more clear about their goals, we set up our patients to be able to achieve those goals. Next, we want to assist them. Exploring barriers and their solutions. All of our patients are going to have barriers when it comes to eating this way or making a change in their diet. Being able to explore those barriers before they come up against them prepares our patients, again, well before that happens, to be able to overcome them. And finally, once you ask them about their barriers, you also want to ask them, well, how do you plan on overcoming this barrier or this challenge? More often than not, all of our patients actually have the solutions to those problems, and we just have to ask. We also want to assist in providing referrals and building a team for our patients. You know, as physicians, as healthcare providers, we're not trained to have these conversations in the ways that our wonderful dietitians are. So refer to dietitians, refer to our health coaches, and build a team. Finally, we want to arrange a very clear follow-up plan for our patients. The 5A's model that I quickly shared with you is most effective in conjunction with patient-centered conversations and also using the principles of motivational interviewing. As healthcare providers, as physicians, we are the experts. We're seen as the experts of nutrition, and we advise and we tell our patients what to do. We are their extrinsic motivating force, or in essence, we are the drivers in that car, driving our patients to good health. What motivational interviewing does, it actually flips that. So our patients are now the drivers, and we're sitting in the passenger seat, empowering, encouraging, and supporting our patients in building their intrinsic motivation so that they, in essence, are driving themselves to good health. Motivational interviewing is just a style of speaking to our patients that's collaborative and really asks our patients what the solutions are to their concerns. The spirit of motivational interviewing is rooted in partnership and acceptance. As mentioned before, we're seen as the experts. We are the plant-based experts, but guess what? Our patients are the experts of themselves. So letting our patients know that we're on the same team and that we're on the same level is the spirit of motivational interviewing. We must have compassion for the challenges that all of our patients face. And this line of speaking and interviewing our patients can be very evocative. It can bring up strong emotions, but that's the point, because that is a strong motivator for change. The core principles of motivational interviewing are, number one, to resist the righting reflex. We, as healthcare providers, people come to us for answers, and we want to give them all these answers, but we want to resist that righting reflex to suggest all the answers. And again, instead, talk to our patients to help themselves uncover what those solutions could be. We have to understand their motivation, listen with an empathic ear, and again, empower our patients in knowing that we are not the ones as providers who are going to give them good health. In fact, they are the ones who are in charge of gaining good health. The skills of motivational interviewing utilize open-ended questions, affirmative statements, reflective statements, and we also summarize. These are powerful tools when we talk to our patients. So Mr. S, after going through the 5A's framework and having multiple sessions of meetings, was actually able to improve his numbers, and he's been happy on a whole food plant-based diet and healthier than ever. Here's some practical tips for the practitioner. Number one, the most important takeaway, I think, is to be an example. You need to practice what you preach walk the walk. Evidence tells us iteratively that patients are more likely to engage in those same healthy behaviors if their provider is also a good example of those healthy behaviors. Good communication is key. Build a list of patient-facing resources. All of these conversations don't need to happen in one visit. Give them those resources so they can continue the conversation at their own pace and at their own convenience. In addition, build and grow a resource list for yourself. And we need to also tell our patients and show our patients that nutrition is at the forefront and important in the care that we provide for them. And here are some examples of how you can show that to them. And finally, to practice, practice, practice. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sardana. Let me share my screen here. I'd like to walk you through a simple, oops, sorry, I need to go back in time. I'm at the end of my presentation, that's not good. There we go. We have a way of prescribing vegan diets here at the Barnard Medical Center and here at the Physicians Committee, particularly when we do research studies. And we realize that we're guiding people to make some pretty big changes. But sometimes those changes can occur really, really rapidly. As you might remember, if you ever went to a swimming pool or brought your kids to a pool, they go from pre-contemplation to into the pool in about 10 seconds. So they go through all those stages quickly. So can I do that by jumping in to a diet? Absolutely. Here's a two-step method. First of all, it's important to explain what the diet is. So if the person has diabetes, I'll take a minute and I'll describe fat building up inside the muscle cells, and if I get the fat out, then their insulin resistance will go away. That takes a little time, but not much time. It doesn't take 10, 15 minutes. It takes about a minute or two, something like that. Okay, and explain why the diet works. That's very quick. Now, I want to go through what the diet is. It's fruits, grains, vegetables, legumes, plus add some vitamin B12. At this point, they don't have to believe it. They don't have to give up their skepticism. They just have to say, okay, I'm ready. Can I jump in? Now the two steps. Step one, and for those of you who are in my earlier talk, I mentioned this before, and I just want to go through it again in another minute or so. The step one is not to change your diet, but just to check out the possibilities. So you give the patient a piece of paper that has breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snack on it, written out as categories, and their job this week is to just fill it out with foods that are vegan that they actually might like. So you'll give them some ideas for breakfast. Could be oatmeal or it could be veggie sausage instead of meat sausage. Give them some ideas for lunches, for dinners. Instead of the hamburger, the veggie burger or the bean burrito or whatever it might be. And then they can think of global cuisine. There are so many choices from Italian, Latin American cuisine, Chinese cuisine with rice and vegetables and tofu dishes. Extra points for Japanese because it's often not only vegan but low in fat. And even fast food chains, not necessarily the world's greatest foods, but you can find vegan options there too. So after 7 days, the patient has finished the first step. They've got their list. Now step two is have a test drive for the next 3 weeks, just eating off your list. And the patient says, wait a minute, that's too easy. I could go vegan for 3 weeks. I could do anything for 3 weeks. And since I got my list, it's really easy. Exactly. At the end of that time, even if they never quite gave up their skepticism and never even made a long-term commitment, they'll discover they've lost weight, they're feeling better, and then doing it from there on out is a much easier thing. Thanks a lot. Now let me turn it over to Dr. Trapp.
Thank you, Neal. Let's see, let me share my screen. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to talk about 2 of the 4 food groups and share some practical information about them. And we're going to start with grains. And why are grains important? Well, of course, they're an important source of protein, which everybody worries about getting enough of, but they're also an excellent source of fiber, the nutrient we should probably worry about more. And they're a good source of complex carbohydrates. If you're old enough to remember the old food pyramid, you know that grains form the base of the food pyramid. Now, why not grains? Well, many people suffer from carbophobia, and grains are a type of carb, but I want to deputize everybody watching this presentation to go out and speak out against this irrational fear, especially for people who think they have to avoid carbs because of weight concerns or because of diabetes. Now, are some grains better than others? Absolutely. And Brenda Davis developed this grain hierarchy. And this shows you which are better than others. So starting at the bottom, these are the ones that are less good. Puffed whole and more highly processed. So puffed whole grains like puff wheat cereal, flaked whole grains like cornflakes, ground whole grains like whole wheat flour. These are the ones that should be your last choices. And then shredded whole grains like shredded wheat cereal, rolled whole grains, that's your old-fashioned oats, cut whole grains like your hearty steel-cut oats, and at the top of the pyramid is intact whole grains like quinoa and barley. So there's a huge variety of grains to choose from, and I encourage everybody to check out some new ones. For example, we have come to love buckwheat groats in our house, sorghum, teff. There's quite a number of great choices. And if you've never had groat meal before, I want you to try this. So get yourself some oat groats, which look a lot like what you would feed a horse. And these are delicious to cook up in place of your rolled oats or old-fashioned oats in the morning. And I've included a simple recipe that I make in my crock pot and 2 links to other recipes. You may have heard some concerns about gluten, but here's what you need to know. First of all, anybody who has celiac disease or sensitivity to gluten should avoid wheat, barley, rye, and triticale. And some oats are processed in factories where these grains are also packaged, so oats can be contaminated. So for people who have celiac disease, they want to definitely look for gluten-free oats. However, gluten-free doesn't mean grain-free. And for people who have these sensitivities, they can choose other grains. They can choose ancient grains or organic grains. And for more ideas, visit the Whole Grains Council. So let's talk about some practical ideas about grains. First of all, often perfectly good grains are spoiled with some unhealthy toppings. For example, don't put dinosaur eggs on your oatmeal. Who knew this was even a thing? Instead, enjoy your oats with some fresh fruit and some nuts. And when you make yourself a delicious sandwich on a hearty whole grain bread, are you going to put mayonnaise on it? No, use mustard or, my favorite, some oil-free hummus. Another concern is that brown rice can be soggy. And what about arsenic in rice? Well, let's talk about both of these. So first of all, brown rice, because of its outside layer, can absorb water and when you're cooking it, and that can lead it to have a texture like soggy newspaper. And you could invest in one of these expensive rice cookers, or let me show you how to toast rice. That's it. It's as easy as rinsing, stirring your rice over high heat, and then cooking it with extra water like pasta, and drain and serve. Brown rice for everyone tonight. What about rice and arsenic? Well, in some places where rice is grown near some industrial runoff, we are seeing that rice can be contaminated. And the way around this is to cook rice like pasta, as we just demonstrated. You can also soak rice for up to 48 hours and drain. You can buy rice from California or Pakistan or India where this contaminant is banned, or you can choose from other grains. So this is really a concern for people who are eating brown rice more than once a day. So next food group we're going to talk about is beans. Why beans? Well, they are nutritional powerhouses. Of course, they're super high in protein. They're a great source of healthy carbohydrate, soluble fiber, calcium, and soy products such as tofu and tempeh have been shown to reduce cancer risk. So let's talk about some practical issues. First of all, sometimes lard is added to beans. This was a disappointment to me when I traveled to Mexico and found every restaurant I went into, there was lard in the beans. So when you're eating out, you can ask about that. And when you're cooking at home, you certainly don't need to add any lard. A second concern is the perception that beans take a long time to cook. And third, what about gassiness? So let's talk about both of those. First of all, in terms of the time, well, the ultimate convenience food is canned beans, and we want to encourage everybody to have an assortment of canned beans in their pantry. So canned beans are a little more expensive than dry beans, but dried beans do take longer to make. However, they practically cook themselves. Let me show you how. There you go. You can make yourself some easy peasy beans. Just rinse them, soak them overnight, change the water, boil for an hour, or if you're using a multi-cooker, just 8 minutes, and there you go. Now, once you've made these beans, an easy thing to do with them is to get yourself a potato masher or an immersion blender and blend these beans into a nice creamy bean dip. And you can put it in some containers, stick it in the freezer, grab one on your way out to the office, or maybe you're eating at home and you defrost them before you make yourself a wonderful bean spread sandwich. And this is an example of planning ahead. Batch cooking is really the secret to always having healthy food available. When you make yourself a big pot of beans, you're going to make more than you need in one meal. So you can store them in some glass jars and put them in the freezer, and then you will always have these delicious fresh beans available. Well, what are you going to top your beans with? How about making some easy pico de gallo? All you need are these ingredients, add them together, and you have a delicious gourmet dinner. Let me give you one more simple recipe idea. This is just 3 ingredients, black bean chili. You're going to start with a couple of cans of black beans, drained. Add some frozen corn and some salsa. Oops, not that. Some salsa. And that will give you a quick and easy dinner tonight, delicious black bean chili. Last concern about beans, some people complain that they just don't digest them well, and that is a sign that they are not eating beans often enough. So what can you do? Well, first of all, make beans from scratch, throw out the soaking water, put in fresh water. Cook them until they're soft. Start with the smaller beans and have smaller portions. And finally, have patience. It may take a little time for your system to adjust, but it will. So I encourage you to try out all these different beautiful beans. Thank you very much. And next up, we have Maggie Neola.
Great. Thank you so much, Carolyn. All right, so I am going to go ahead and cover the last two food groups here on the power plate. So let's start with vegetables. Now vegetables, why are they so important for us? Well, they are very high in nutrient density, antioxidants, and fiber, which is, if you know, the exact opposite of the standard American diet. So no surprise that Americans simply are just not eating enough vegetables. But you have a unique role to help your patients change that statistic. All right, but what about, can I have fresh, canned, or frozen vegetables? Well, all three are a viable option. Fresh is fantastic, especially when it's more local. Frozen, what's unique about that is it's frozen at peak ripeness, meaning those nutrients are preserved in there and really helpful for us to have on hand. And canned, when you're choosing those, try to pick low sodium varieties for your best option. All right, but practical issues. You have patients who aren't eating enough, and why is that? Well, one, they're neglecting those vegetables, not eating enough of them, and two, they tend to drown them in high saturated fat condiments like cheese, oil, or butter. So let's talk about how to solve those, in addition to why we're not getting a variety of vegetables, why we're so unfamiliar with this group. So to start us off with, why are vegetables neglected? Well, we often see broccoli being like at the corner or edge of one's plate, very small quantities, may not even be eaten. And how do we change that? Well, we want to put these vegetables in the spotlight. You can see in this picture, a broccoli burrito, that there's a lot of broccoli in here, and it's like the main feature of this dish. So how do we encourage those patients to really make at least 50% of their plate coming from these vegetables, where they're the main feature instead of traditional meat, for example? That doesn't need to be on the plate. How about also the issue of, adding cheese and oil and butter, which is spiked saturated fat content? Let's talk about teaching our patients how to use herbs and spices, vinegars, aromatics. All of these have a lot of health benefits. And again, we tend to just forget about them as being super delicious and healthy for us. And then when it comes to our patients not really knowing how to switch it up, buying the same things like celery and carrots every week, or just not knowing the wide variety of vegetables, encourage them to try new ones, or maybe ones they just haven't had in a while, and then preparing them different ways. I'm sure you've heard your patients say, I just don't like broccoli, but have they ever tried it roasted? Maybe they like it steamed. There's so many different ways, or combining it with other vegetables at the same time, so you have a variety on your plate instead of just 2 cups of broccoli. You can switch it up and it makes it more interesting. So really pushing your patients to be adventurous here. Now, cruciferous vegetables. These are fantastic. This is things like broccoli, cauliflower, kale, collard greens, and they all have these amazing anti-cancer properties and are great to eat on a daily basis. Now, you may wonder, what about patients with hypothyroidism? Is it safe for them to eat these? And it definitely is. The issue comes to play when someone's eating 2 pounds of broccoli or cauliflower a day, or has low iodine, which again really isn't happening. So not a major concern, something to keep in the back of your mind, but really encouraging these patients to include cruciferous vegetables on a daily basis. Mushrooms, all right, so these are amazing. There's studies that show if you eat mushrooms several times a week, it can slow cognitive decline. Sounds great to me. But one thing to keep in mind is that with shiitake mushrooms specifically, you do want to cook them. There are naturally higher levels of formaldehyde in this mushroom variety. But when you cook them for at least 3 to 6 minutes, it becomes a problem. It does not become a problem anymore. So definitely still include shiitake and all the different types of mushrooms that are out there. All right, so sea vegetables. Kind of another one that's not as common in some people's diets. But these are a great source of iodine, vitamin C, and manganese. And some examples might be nori, kombu, and wakame. So this is a fun way to get some veggie sushi in. And I want to show you a quick video on how to make some seaweed salad that's very simple and delicious. know that looked amazing to me, and if you missed some of the directions, I have them here on this slide so you can reference them later and make this and encourage your patients to try it too. And these videos like the one that Carolyn also showed are really great to share with your patients, another way to have the opportunity for some culinary nutrition education. All right, let's finish up with fruit. This is the fourth and final group on the power plate. And very similar to vegetables, they are high in nutrient density, antioxidants, and fiber. So again, very, very important to include in our diets every day. But some practical issues, again, these tend to be neglected. We forget about them, don't buy them. And questions, come up. Are these okay for me? They're high in sugar. So let's talk about that. So when they come to being neglected, again, trying new ones, there's a vast world of fruits out there. You can see in this picture, there's kiwi and grapes and mango and apricots, and there's just hundreds of varieties out there. So really helping your patients think, okay, what's in season, what's available, what are the ones that I keep walking by at the grocery store, farmer's market. And if you have patients who tend to buy these melons or mangoes and forget to cut them up before they go bad, you could encourage them to spend a little extra money and buy the pre-cut versions so they get in the habit of eating these fruits. And then once they've, really grown accustomed to enjoying them on a daily basis and feel more motivated to save some money, they can buy them in their whole version and cut them up themselves. And lastly, just adding that variety. If we only ever eat bananas and apples every day, we're missing out on the large variety of different fruits that are out there, which help us have healthier bodies. And then when it comes to sugar, so is this a problem? Well, it's not. The fruit that has sugar in it, and it's naturally occurring. It's supposed to be in there. And the cool thing about fruit is that it comes with fiber, which helps us to not spike blood sugar. And now most of fruits are actually low glycemic. Not everybody knows that, but you'll notice watermelon and pineapple are not low glycemic. But one thing to think when you're including those is to pair them with foods that are low glycemic, which lessens that glycemic load. Even if you don't, it's still a fantastic thing to include. You don't need to discourage your patients from enjoying some watermelon. All right, smoothies. Now this is something that a lot of my patients will enjoy starting to get their, start getting some more fruits and vegetables in, and this is a fun way to do it. However, let's think about the speed at which someone finishes a smoothie. They tend to finish it in like 5 minutes or less. Very easy to drink, it tastes good, and sometimes there's like 5 or 6 different fruits in there and juice, and there's just not much variety that goes into this smoothie. And lastly, the quantity of it. We tend to put more than we could actually chew if we had to. 6 bananas and 4 pineapples. It's just too much. So I would encourage patients to slow down, to enjoy that smoothie over a good 20 or 30-minute period at minimum, to switch it up and include some fruits and some vegetables, and then using things like water or non-dairy milk as the liquid, and to only put in what they put in there, what they can actually eat or chew if they were to do so. So again, we're not overloading our bodies with so much at one time. All right, dried fruit. So dried fruit is really nice because it's shelf stable and tastes really good. It's very fun on top of salads, but it's very important to stick to a serving size, which is a 1/4 cup, simply because these tend to be higher in calories because they don't have that water content. You can see these raisins used to be grapes, which are much larger. And when you eat things with higher water content, like fresh fruit, you feel full quicker. And so it's very easy to eat a cup of raisins before you realize that it's been a cup, and then all of a sudden you have a lot of calories. So really focusing on having dried fruit as 1 serving a day at most, and really switching up with the fresh and frozen as your better options there. So you've seen all these different food groups: fruits, grains, legumes, and vegetables. And this is a fantastic image to encourage your patients to put on the fridge or even put in your own office to reference during your visits, and share virtually as well. And we want to encourage our patients to eat from each of these food groups every day, multiple times a day, for a really helpful diet. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. I will be speaking to you about transition foods. So first of all, let's start with, what are transition foods? You've probably seen these all over the grocery store shelves. Roughly speaking, transition foods are basically plant-based foods that are meant to simulate the taste of traditional animal-based foods such as meat and dairy products. And then the next question is, you're seeing them everywhere and you're wondering, are they healthy for me or not? Should I buy them for my family? Should I recommend them to my patients? So let's start with some of the benefits with them. First of all, because they're naturally plant-based and they have no animal products, they have no cholesterol. Cholesterol is only found in animal foods. It is not found in plant-based foods, so that's a plus. They tend to be hormone-free. They are much more humane and ethical, and they're better for the environment. And then as far as their nutrition profiles, they can be high in fat, just like their animal-based counterparts. They can be high in fat. Some of them can be high in saturated fat, and they are low in fiber, and their caloric density may be high. So if you are purchasing these, try to find ones where they are low in fat. So look for labels that say 2 to 3 grams of fat per serving. You've probably seen vegan cheeses everywhere. There are dozens of varieties by different manufacturers. So let's break this down a little bit for you. Roughly speaking, vegan cheeses are either made from coconut or palm oil, or they are made from nuts. Both types tend to be really high in fat. However, the ones made from coconut or palm oil tend to be particularly high in saturated fat, similar to dairy cheese. On the other hand, the ones made from nuts, even though they're high in fat, it's mostly unsaturated fat, so the saturated fat content is much lower. So I recommend going with the nut-based versions because they're much lower in saturated fat. So this is a packet of vegan mozzarella shreds that I picked up, and we see that 1 ounce has 80 calories. It is a high-fat food. It has 6 grams of fat, 3.5 of which are saturated fat, and it is high in sodium as well. And the reason this is high in saturated fat is it is made with palm fruit oil, which is naturally high in saturated fat. So instead of that, opt for something like this. This is a cashew-based line of cheese from Treeline. And what's great about these is they're made with cashews. So even though they are high in fat, they're not high in saturated fat, and this is one of the few brands that's actually low in sodium. So I show you here that one serving size has 7 grams of fat, only 1 gram of saturated fat, and the sodium content is also low at 90. So try these. They're great at a party. Your guests won't be able to tell the difference. Now these meat analogs are really taking off, such as Beyond Meats, and let's look at their nutrition profile. First of all, we see in the ingredients that they have canola oil and coconut oil, so they're likely to be high in saturated fat. And we see that one patty has 18 grams of fat, 5 of which are saturated, and they're also high in sodium. So just like the meat analogs, they're high in fat, they're high in saturated fat, low in sodium, high in fiber, so not as healthy as some other burgers out there. And then similar story with the Impossible Burger. This is also made with coconut oil. It has 14 grams of fat, 8 of which are saturated, and it has 370 milligrams of sodium. So what can you try instead? I know in my family, we love these products by Engine 2. My kids devour them. They don't stay on the shelves very long. These are sold frozen, and they are by Rip Esselstyn. And naturally, anything he makes will be healthy. Look who he grew up with, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. So let's look at these burgers. One burger has 140 calories, so a lot fewer calories, only 2 grams of fat, no saturated fat, and it's low in sodium. So it meets all the requirements. So there are healthier versions out there to try. So the bottom line on transition foods, they have certain benefits. They are more humane, they're naturally hormone and cholesterol free, but just like the animal-based versions they're trying to simulate, they can be high in fat and sodium. Some of them can be high in saturated fat, so it's best to use them to transition rather than making them a staple in your plant-based diet. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you everyone for the wonderful and inspirational presentations. Participants have been asking about these videos that you've just seen, and these video links will be available to you on the ICNM resource page. My name is Geraldine Adams. I'm a diabetes education and care specialist at Barnard Medical Center. We have a little time for some questions. So let's get started. We have a question for Dr. Sardana. The question is, what are good low-cost resources to brush up on motivational interviewing for primary care providers?
Thank you, Geraldine. That is a great question. So there are online classes and training available from multiple organizations. So Miller and Rolnick, who are the clinical psychologists and the fathers, as it were, of motivational interviewing, actually offer motivational interviewing training, as well as other companies like IFIOC, where I've done training. But if you want to even look for, if you're looking for something that's completely free, let me tell you, you could go to YouTube and you can, type in motivational interviewing. And I've even done this to help brush up on talking to, a patient that's a little bit harder to speak to, just to get an idea or to model motivational interviewing. So you can go to YouTube and look at free videos, but there's also trainings available online.
Great. Thank you so much. We have a second question for Dr. Rahman. The question is, which plant-based foods are best to address this large appetite-driven overeating, given that satiating high-fat vegan foods can have deleterious health effects?
So if I'm understanding the question is what kind of foods can you eat that aren't high in fat, but that will also be satiating? And the food group that immediately comes to mind are the legumes, the beans, the lentils. They tend to be really high in protein, really high in fiber, and they can leave us feeling satiated without added fat in them. And another food group are the grains, as Dr. Trapp talked about. Try to use whole grains, try to use intact grains. They're much more satiating than refined grains. And then make sure you get enough fiber in your diet with all those fruits and vegetables. So we don't need to have fat to feel satiated if we're getting all those food groups on a daily basis.
And I just want to jump in on that too. That's an excellent response, Dr. Aman. Also including starchy vegetables like potatoes and tubers and winter squash, as these have a lot of weight to them. And they can really help you feel full longer. So just one extra tip for that answer.
Great. Thank you both. Now we have a question for our dietitian, Maggie Neola. Do I have to eat organic vegetables?
Get that question a lot, and the answer is no, you don't have to. I do believe it is a personal preference. It does cost more money as well, but there's so many benefits to eating vegetables, even if they're only conventional. There's a list called the Dirty Dozen that tends to have more pesticides on them. So if you wanted to look that up every year, it gets updated every year, and you can see which ones are most likely to have pesticides on them, not just vegetables, but fruits as well. And the ones you could start off choosing organic, but again, it's not required to still reap many benefits from produce.
Great, thank you. So I have a question for Dr. Barnard. How do you respond to the idea that vegetarian or vegan meals are more expensive?
You run into the store and you go to the bean aisle and you look at those packs of dried beans and you calculate how many servings you could cook for one of those 99-cent packs, and then run over to produce and look at what a bag of sweet potatoes costs. And then run back to the frozen aisle and you see those little blocks of broccoli or whatever, and they're the cheapest things in the store. And if you look at the cheese aisle and the meat aisle, you realize all that money you're not going to spend on those things, you can spend on beans and sweet potatoes and vegetables and things. Many years ago, researchers at the George Washington University looked at the budgets for a family of four that would just go vegetarian, and they found that they would save about $1,500 a year. It's probably even more if you throw out the cheese and the eggs and so forth.
Great, thank you so much. We have one last question here for Dr. Trapp. So the question is, I've always heard that adding salt makes beans tougher and harder to cook, but your video said to add salt to the soaking water. I'm confused.
You passed the test. You were really watching the video. And it may be a surprise to many people to see the recommendation about adding salt to the soaking water, but the reason for that is it keeps calcium from hard water from entering the beans as they soak. Now, that said, if you heard Dr. Rahman talk about high blood pressure, you never want to add salt to anything, and you don't need to add salt, and you can still get some nice beans that will easily be very mashable. You just cook them a little harder. So the salt's totally optional.
Great, thank you. We have a question here for Maggie, or do you have any recommendations regarding food selection, meal preparation, and dietary habits for those who suffer from GERD? What can be done to ensure a balanced, healthy diet, including veggies, fruits, beans, lentil, complex carbs, while preventing and controlling the heartburn and the indigestion symptoms?
Well, I think that we can easily hop on this together, but one thing that I would add is, or start off with, would be really figuring out what the trigger foods are that are causing indigestion and heartburn. Some people have different issues. Some may not tolerate cocoa or spicy foods or high-fat foods. Those are some pretty common ones. Another tip is to not lay down within 30 minutes of eating a meal, as that tends to cause food to come back up your esophagus if you don't have a strong esophageal sphincter. But there might be others, so I'm going to throw it off to anybody else here that would like to answer that. But that's my answer for you.
Great, thank you so much. We have one more question here for Dr. Rahman. Are soy protein isolates safe? They are prevalent in a lot of transition foods.
Yeah, so they're fine to eat. Soy protein isolates are basically taking the protein portion of soy and then packaging into something that will simulate the taste of something meaty. So they're low in fat. The issue sometimes can be the way they may be made. They may be high in sodium if they've had different flavors or additives added. And sometimes they may not be high in fiber, but they're certainly much healthier than the meat counterparts. So a great way to transition again.
Terrific. Thank you. Now here's a question we don't get all the time, but what vegan food is the best for healthily gaining weight?
I'm happy to jump in on that. So the question I would ask is, what is the goal for gaining the weight? Sometimes people are going by a BMI number or something someone maybe suggested to them. But if someone is healthy, they're exercising, they're able to do the things they enjoy doing, they're sleeping well, they feel well, and their health is in good condition, maybe that weight is fine for them. But if on the other hand, they're not feeling well, then instead of just thinking of the food, I would recommend talking to their healthcare provider and seeing, is there something going on? Is there a secondary cause that an illness that could be contributing? So, but if they're feeling fine, maybe that's where they need to be.
Great. Thank you so much. We have a question for Dr. Trapp. And it says, patients often ask me about increasing vegetable intake while on warfarin. Any tips apart from keeping it consistent?
So this is a great question. It used to be that patients who were put on blood thinners, Coumadin, warfarin, were told to limit green vegetables. And that was really doing a disservice to people. Now they're told they can eat green leafy vegetables, but they should keep the amount consistent. And that is good advice. And I would suggest just thinking about doing it by the cupful, making sure that you maybe are going to always have a fresh salad every day, always have some cooked vegetables. Patients could also, the providers could also check INR more often as patients are making this shift. I haven't seen anything written in terms of advice for increasing the frequency from monthly, but I know Dr. John McDougall would do it every other week until the INR was stable.
Thank you so much. We have another question here about starter kits and for a vegan diet. Which one do you recommend? Anyone?
I can jump in on that. The one that I recommend to our patients is the one that comes from PCRM, We were the original ones to create a starter kit on how to start a plant-based diet or vegan diet. They've been, duplicated multiple times, but we have the original, and that's the one I recommend.
That's terrific. I think we are just about out of time. So thank you to everyone for all this helpful information.